Hello, this is Dr. Sudarshan, psychiatrist, bringing to you the latest in the series of neuro-psychiatric educative videos meant for the common people. The aim of these psychiatric videos is mainly to make people aware of the common mental health problems which almost all of us face. The idea is to get rid of the social stigma which is associated with these mental health problems in this part of the world. Okay, so these videos attempts to explain in the layman's term. I mean, I'm oversimplifying and so that the people are able to understand and they are able to inculcate a sense of awareness within themselves, and of course the social stigma associated is taken care of to some extent once people are aware. Now, what is a brain's response? How does the brain respond to anxiety, and stress? Now, you see, you have to take into consideration certain parts of the brain, some certain anatomical parts of the brain. Now, I'm not going into the details of neuroanatomy, which is outside the scope of this video. So, the first part we have to take into consideration is the thalamus. Now, the thalamus is the central hub of the brain. The thalamus is the central hub of the brain, and it breaks down the incoming visual and the auditory responses. The incoming visual and auditory responses, which we receive through eyes and through ears, and of course the other responses is the smell and other things, but mainly the visual and the auditory responses are broken down. The visual responses are broken down into based on the size, the shape, and the color of the object which is actually providing us this stimulus. We see something, the stimulus goes to the thalamus. The thalamus breaks down the visual stimulus based on on the size, on the shape, and on the color, and then after processing this information, it passes it on to the cortex, another area of the brain. The thalamus passes the stimulus after analyzing it to the cortex. Now, the cortex actually gives meaning to these sights and sounds. The cortex gives meaning to these sights and sounds, which are broken down by the thalamus and sent to the cortex. So we know what the sights and sounds associated with. Another portion of the brain which we have to consider is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, you just keep this in mind. The prefrontal cortex is very vital to turn off the anxiety response. The prefrontal cortex is very vital to turn off the anxiety response to any sort of anxiety or fear stimulus. Another portion of the brain which we have to take into consideration is the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional hub of the brain. The amygdala happens to be the emotional hub of the brain, and this amygdala actually, based on the stimulus it receives, it sets off the immediate burst of this fear response. The amygdala sets off the immediate burst of fear response. Okay. This is passed on by the amygdala to the locus coeruleus. This is passed on by the amygdala to the locus coeruleus, and which initiates the classic fear response. The locus coeruleus, on receiving stimulus from the amygdala, sets off this, initiates the classic responses associated with fear and anxiety, like your heart beats faster, it pumps more blood to the periphery, and then there's a lot of perspiration, you sweat a lot, and then basically you hyperventilate. I mean, you hyperventilate to the lungs, taking deep breaths and all that. I mean, not necessarily as such, but still we do it. I mean, that is initiated by this locus coeruleus. Now, then another part of the brain we will consider is the hippocampus. Okay, the hippocampus is the memory center of our brain. Just as the amygdala is the emotional hub of the brain, the hippocampus is the memory hub, the memory center of the brain, and it receives the raw information from the senses which we just now described. sight and sound, etc., etc. And the hippocampus receives the raw information from the senses, and it also receives the emotional baggage sent by the amygdala. So the responses from the brain, the responses from the senses, sight, smell, etc., and otherwise, and sound, and plus this is coupled with the emotional baggage sent by the amygdala, the emotional hub of the brain. And so there is a sort of analysis of these two taken together done at the hippocampus. Now, as I said, that so we have come to the hippocampus, where the stimulus from the senses and the emotional hub, the emotional baggage is sent by the amygdala. They are processed. Now, then this the responses of the reaction of the body to this anxiety, stress, and fear. Okay, they are triggered by the senses of sight and sound. The senses of sight and sound, as I said, that it comes to the thalamus, then the amygdala, and in the amygdala the threat is processed. In the amygdala the threat is processed. I mean, it is processed after it comes to the amygdala in the cortex. Okay, and I mean, it is processed in the cortex before you can actually feel the fear. So all these reactions which are actually described, I mean, coming from the senses and the emotional baggage, they are actually processed. They are processed before the actual fear response is triggered. They are processed in the cortex before the actual fear response is triggered. That is, as I said, the hyperventilation, and then the heart pumping more, the blood, okay, and then perspiration. Okay. Now, the role of the hypothalamus and the pituitary, hypothalamus, another portion of the brain, and the pituitary gland are very much vital. The hypothalamus and the pituitary gland actually they actually then direct the adrenal gland. They on receiving these responses, and basically when the brain processes it, and in the cortex, and then the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, they actually direct, they stimulate the adrenal gland, another gland, neurosecretory gland in our body. And this adrenal gland actually releases the cortisol hormone. The cortisol hormone is released, which then sends the message to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is stimulated, and the hippocampus then sends the signals, so that that's when the reactions we are familiar with, when we are conscious with, the conscious reactions takes place. That is, the heart beats faster, the lungs are hyperventilate, and there is also perspiration. Okay, and your senses actually become hyper alert. You understand? I mean, when you are suffering from fear, your senses become hyper alert. And now that is one thing good, and it is a good useful response to any sort of emergency situation. Now, as the senses become hyper alert, there is a release of the adrenaline. The adrenaline is released, and that, as you know, or many of us know, that it is known as the fear, flight, and flight hormone. The fear, flight, and flight hormone. Okay. Now, the cortex actually processes whether the threat is genuine or not. I mean, the fear response, the response to anxiety and fear takes place, but then the cortex at the same time it processes that whether the fear is genuine or not. And I mean, if it perceives that yes, the fear is genuine, and basically, we should actually take that fear seriously, then it signals the amygdala to continue. It signals the amygdala to continue with this fear response. Otherwise, it stops. Now, the anxiety is actually, as we say, that anxiety is actually the fear of the unknown. and phobia is the fear of the known. It's a very generalized definition. Anxiety, fear of the unknown, and phobia, fear of the known. Now, the bed nucleus of the striatum the bed nucleus of the striatum actually does I mean is very much responsible for this anxiety reaction. The bed nucleus of the stria terminals responsible, as I said, for the anxiety the response. Now, as I said, that the processing, the cortex processes that whether the fear is genuine or not, or whether the amygdala, and then it signals the amygdala whether it should continue with the fear response or not. Now, yes, this is the broad mechanism by which basically our body responds. I mean, I've tried to explain this in the layman's terms. Too much of medical jargon will confuse. So, I mean, this is the sole purpose of this video is to familiarize the common person with these various anatomical structures, regions within the brain, and some of the hormones associated. Now, we can actually use our prefrontal cortex to turn off the inappropriate fear reaction. Inappropriate fear reaction can be turned off using our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for many of our executive functions, the decision making, etc., etc. So that will be the topic of the next video, which I'm going to present. If you're liking my videos, please do actually put your likes if you like it, put in your valuable comments, your feedback, and also share the videos with your friends and others, so that more and more persons can be made aware. You can visit my Facebook page, you can visit my Instagram account, and you should visit my YouTube channel too. And as I said, that like, comment, subscribe, and please share. So till the next video comes on the how you can use the prefrontal cortex to turn off the inappropriate reactions to fear, it's goodbye from my end. Thank you.